Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Version 1, a podcast where interesting people come to talk about their creative process, imposter syndrome, inspiration, failures along the way, and much more. I'm your host, Waverly, and you can follow the show on Instagram at Version 1 Podcast and subscribe to our Substack, version1podcast.substack.com. You can also find me on buymeacoffee.com/Waverly Colville if you want to support the show. You can listen to this episode wherever you get your podcasts or head over to YouTube to watch the video version. Remember to leave us a nice review and rate us 5 stars. All right, let's get into the episode. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be
Yes,
here.
thank you so much. I'm so excited to get into all the interesting and cool work that you do. Can we just start with having you introduce yourself and what Mindful Creative Muse is for the audience, please?
Yeah, so I'm an artist and an educator. I largely teach online classes and teacher trainings that really help busy, stressed creatives make more art in a way that feels easier and joyful. I do that with art as a form of meditation or art combined with mindfulness. So it's really a lovely way to bypass the inner critic and imposter syndrome.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited to chat with you because this is all things that I've had to deal with in my personal life, and I know a lot of other people have. So I know you're going to give us so much interesting tidbits and knowledge and help that we all need as creative people trying to make it in this world. When you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
It's so funny. I actually wanted to be an artist or a teacher, and I am both
Yeah.
now. So I think sometimes we really have that figured out when we're little
Yeah,
kiddos.
absolutely. What kind of artist did you want to be, or what kind of art were you drawn to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was younger, I mostly did drawing as a younger child. And then I didn't start painting until teenager and college years. And now I really enjoy both as well as collage and photography. So usually if it's 2D media, that's my
Nice.
jam.
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like a really fun, interesting mix of creative modalities that you do. That's awesome. What could you talk to me a bit about your life as an artist and kind of what your life looked like before you started Mindful Creative Muse?
Yeah, so I largely was doing artwork for my own, like to manage stress and anxiety in my early 20s. I started painting actually Bob Ross
Oh, I love
paintings
that.
when I was doing, I love Bob Ross, he's amazing. When I was doing full time managerial work and full time college, and I was just kind of burning the candle at both ends. Art for me, painting especially, at the time I started with landscapes and then I went into abstracts pretty quickly. It was really my safe space that I could drop into and create. And then it was years later that I started incorporating mindfulness and meditation and the practice evolved. But that's definitely the root of where it
Yeah,
started.
absolutely. When did you start seeing that mindfulness could be combined with art?
It's a good question. I had a separate yoga and meditation and mindfulness practice for a long time, and I did I had them as two separate paths. And then I realized that probably a lot of creatives listening to this as well have already experienced this. When we're making art, it's so easy for us to drop into a flow state, for us to be more present. Sometimes we might still be distracted and thinking about our grocery list or maybe judging our artwork internally. I hear that from a lot of students, and I've experienced that as well. But many times when we make art, we we can feel more naturally in the present moment. And so then I just started realizing, why am I separating out mindfulness and meditation from the art, and started being more intentional and doing research and figuring out how can I really combine these in a more intentional way. So that was, for me, it really started around 2009 or so. I was treated for cancer and then had kind of some deeper healing journeys, and that led me towards wanting to
Oh
combine them.
wow. I'm so sorry to hear that you went through that, but I hope you're doing okay now.
Oh yeah, no, I'm great. And it was a really a big catalyst actually for the work that I'm doing now, and for having art, that our art practice can be something that's really supportive for stress relief, for self-care, to help us if we're struggling with something or through our own healing journey. Different from art therapy, but that we have that that we can choose to do those things for ourselves as well. So I'm, very grateful for
Yeah,
everything.
absolutely. So at the time, it sounds like you were working a more like traditional 9 to 5 job and doing this sort of things on the side. Was your experience with cancer sort of like a realization of, oh, my life needs to go a different direction, or was it a combination of things? Or talk to me about how you kind of went from a more traditional job to doing the work that you do now.
Yeah, so at the time when that happened, I was in my master's, my MFA program for the arts. I actually found out right as around the time I did my walk, like my graduation walk. And so for me, it didn't switch a huge trajectory because I was already on that path of being a professional artist and teaching, and I had a photography business at the time. I think instead, what it really offered for me was just insight for myself that art could be a place and a space where if I was struggling with finding words for an experience, like going through something like a difficult cancer treatment, or we all have our own stories, of things that can be difficult in life, that art could be like a salve for me, like this balm or this nurturing support or I often sometimes refer to it like a container, that I can be held within. And so that was just something that deepened at that time for me. And then I felt more of an inspiration and call to really deepen in that practice, and then also to share with others. And now I've been able to work with students in like 99 countries and teach and train others with this work. So it's just been it's like my life's calling. It's very important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful that you were able to use artistic practice to deal with very, I'm sure, difficult emotions and life experiences and things like that. When did you decide to make Mindful Creative Muse into like a company and like start teaching others? What you yourself were just doing it on a personal level, it sounds like.
Yeah, so I had been teaching art. I started teaching art separate from mindfulness and meditation around 2007 or so. And then I had my photography business for about 7 years, and I was teaching, on the side. And then really with this business, I've been teaching now through Mindful Creative Muse for 8 years, although I had a different business name initially. But it's been about 8 years of really dedicating to this work. And one thing that I really love and appreciate about creativity, that I hear this from students I work with all the time or other artists, friends, is just how meandering our creative paths can be. And that if there's this openness that we kind of follow the breadcrumbs with curiosity to see where it might lead us, that's kind of the approach I try to take with it. But yeah, it's been 8 years
Wow,
now.
that's incredible. Who are your students?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it varies somewhat, but a large majority of my students are, I would say, the range varies, but between like 30. I mostly work with adults, so between 30 and 65 years old, and really people. I kind of work with multiple people. Sometimes people who are already creatives. They know they're creative. They just want to find new tools and techniques and exercises. A lot of times it's creatives who can be really hard on themselves, can have a strong inner critic, who might be feeling stuck in a rut or creatively blocked or wanting something else beyond, outside of the formal classroom of learning technique only. Because the focus with mindful art and meditation, it's not just on the aesthetic part, it's also on trusting the process, trusting our creative process, going with the flow, giving permission to create. So it marries really nicely with a more traditional art practice as well. And then I work with a lot of teachers because I do train people how to share these practices. So I work with teachers, with art therapists, educators, yoga teachers, things like that.
Wow. Okay, yeah, so a wide range of people it sounds like. That's really cool. I'm curious, could you take us into like one of your course is course the right word? Like what does it look like to work with you? Could you tell us like kind of like the format and what it looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So before COVID happened, I was teaching in person and online. And then since then, I've mostly been teaching online. I occasionally do one or two in person retreats that are longer for a deeper dive that are in person, but everything else is online. And I have a combination of either pre recorded classes, workshops, trainings that you can do with your own schedule. They're in bite-sized lessons, so you can, do them in 15-minute chunks or an hour on the weekend. And then I also have live or hybrid options where we gather on Zoom and we connect a bit more in community. And so I find everybody is a bit different as far as like your schedule or how much connection you're looking for or not. And so it's kind of, I refer to it like a buffet, like choose your own adventure,
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the lessons that or exercises that you take your students through?
So it can really vary. Anywhere from really simple breath practices and drawing and just arriving in the present moment, noticing how we're holding the pen or pencil or brush in our hand, really feeling the texture of the page, noticing the sounds as we're making marks. I see those a lot of times as really simple grounding practices or warm-ups. So if a creative already has a drawing or painting practice, you can still continue that, and these can be kind of added in. And then I have some more in-depth, longer practices as well that combine collage or layers. I'm really a big fan of mixed media. I would say a big part of what I do in my own practice, but also what I teach, is kind of three parts. The piece of mark making, so the actual art practice, the mindfulness or meditation piece, and then I like to make meaning of a lot of the art that I make. I don't always do it, but for me that feels kind of like the secret sauce. It's the extra frosting on the cake, and so it's kind of like having a visual journal, and we can be curious about the marks that we made and can have insights reflected back to us. And I guide that whole process, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, it sounds very introspective and intuitive, and it sounds very, very cool. That's awesome. I'd love to take a workshop with you one day. It sounds very fun. I was wondering if you could define exactly what mindful art is, if you could give a definition for it in comparison to, like, I guess, other forms of art.
Yeah, so mindful art, I like to think of it as really the marrying of our creative practice, whether that's drawing or painting, with mindful awareness. And mindfulness, I know that term can be used so often, so I kind of want to define just that term as well. So mindfulness is really just being attuned and aware in the present moment. But the key part that I actually hear that isn't mentioned a lot is with non-judgmental awareness, with compassion and kindness. And that's why having that as a foundation, being mindful, present, non-judgmental, kind to ourselves as we're making art, is something that for me I've just found so soothing and supportive and really permission giving to make art without having this, internal critic kind of judging or comparing what we're making to other people. So that's the absolute foundation, but the definition goes deeper from there, and there's different styles and approaches, but that's the
Yeah,
basics. Yeah.
absolutely. You just touched on so many different things I want to dive deeper in with you, because something that I had struggled with, especially when I was younger, was the fear of being bad at something, like judging my work. And just, yeah, the fear of being like bad. So not even wanting to try, or like drawing something and then being like so embarrassed that I just like rip it up. So, because I'm like, oh my God, no one can see this. Like, I'm horrible. You know what I mean? And having like that sort of just like harsh inner critic. And yeah, I love that you do work around like sort of healing that or dealing with that. And so, yeah, you just touch on so many things that I'm like, oh, yes, we got to talk about that. You mentioned earlier that mindful art is different than art therapy. Could you talk to me about why those two things are different?
Absolutely. Yeah, they're definitely different. And I like to mention that anytime before I do a workshop or a class or a training, just to be really clear. I do have some art therapists who go through my teacher training that also bring mindful art into their art therapy practice, and they're licensed, but they're still different things. So mindful art, I like to think of it of, so I mentioned kind of an art journal earlier, but if we're doing a Dear Diary practice at home. That might feel really therapeutic and supportive and nurturing for ourselves. And that's still entirely different from working with a licensed therapist. They have directives. You're working on a specific issue, or perhaps the focus is on healing trauma. Whereas the Dear Diary moment, whether that's writing or we have our own art journal and we're creating, it's really a time and space for us to nurture ourselves, to have self-care, to be curious, to have that inquiry, to be playful or joyful, or notice what is coming up in the present moment when we're doing that with mindful art. The intention is very different. The approach is very different. And yeah, that's how I like to kind of think about it between those two.
Gotcha. Thank you for explaining that. And I was curious, how do you define creativity?
Oh my goodness, I love this question. I feel like my definition would constantly be evolving and changing with that. What is coming up for me right now is that creativity is a form of curiosity and innovation. And I think that creativity can be, it might be drawing and painting. My sister loves to cook. My mom loves to garden. I have friends who love to sing. I have other friends that are really great at math. I see all of those things as creative. I think creativity is something where we stretch just outside of our comfort zone, and that there can be problem solving, but also innovation and curiosity. Yeah, it's what a
I
fun
love
question.
that. I love the word innovation because I think it is, and I love that you said your definition always changes because that is a form of creativity. Is like thinking about the different ways of you can be creative, and yeah, and it is a very like sort of in a way an abstract concept, I guess. And so yeah, I love the words that you put to it. So I absolutely love that. Um, do you believe that every person is creative?
100%. I think that the creativity can look different and feel different for everybody, but I believe that creativity is, you know, the same of how we all breathe every day as humans, and that's part of just being human as we breathe. That creativity is exactly the same, that it's part of our human experience.
Why do you think some people think that they're not creative?
That's a good question. I think a part of it, just speaking from my experience, like when I was growing up, um, I have had so many conversations with students and friends and creatives where many of them have had some type of personal experience where they were judged as they were creating or performing, or you know, whatever it is, and then that judgment was internalized. There's really interesting research that's been done actually around children and creating, and under the age of, I think it's around like 5 or 6, with singing. The study that I read was an example of singing, that children were just very open to being creative and playful and singing. And then there is a certain age range, it was somewhere around 6 or maybe 8 years old, around the fourth grade mark, that there started being more of this self-consciousness of, I'm not a singer, I'm not going to do it good enough. I'm going to be teased from other kids, or you know, and I don't know that it's all necessarily related to that, but I just personally have had experience with that, and talking with other friends and creatives and students, that I think that then can influence how comfortable we feel, and that critic gets internalized, because I don't feel like when we're, you know, born and creating, we don't have that critic. We just are curious and creating and being playful, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that because for the longest time, I didn't really think of myself as a creative person, even though, like, I know now as an adult who's done a lot of work and like therapy and stuff like that, like, I know that I am, but it's because when I was a kid, and I don't have like a specific like memory of like this one thing happened, but for some reason I internalized, oh, I can't draw, so like I must not be creative. And I don't know why my definition of creativity was so narrow that I boiled it down to drawing only, but like I don't know like what the memory was, but for so like it's silly how like like these like weird, like, maybe like conglomerate of experiences kind of like internalize a message that probably wasn't even like directly said to me, but for some reason I like my brain interpreted it that way. But yeah, it's really interesting to think about like where did that come from and why was my definition so narrow, as a kid. And so but I internalized that for a long time. And I think it stopped me from pursuing a lot of different avenues when I was, especially in my early 20s, until I like really unpacked that. And I was like, wait, why do I believe this? This is not true.
It's such an interesting thought too, because if I think about doing any new thing or skill, and I've never done it before, like I've never walked before, I've never swam before, I've never, I don't know, driven a car or done these things, we wouldn't have the pressure on ourselves to do it and then think that we're just going to magically know how to do it and feel really comfortable. And there's this really interesting myth, I think, around creativity, specifically around art making, like drawing, painting, where there can be this, I've heard this from so many students, and I've had this experience as well years ago, in that we want to draw and then we draw and it doesn't look the way we intended, or we're trying to do maybe a specific thing and we don't have that skill set yet. Of course we don't have that skill set because it's totally brand new. So it's just such an interesting thing that I think is so common. It's so common to have those thoughts around it, which is also why I especially love combining the mindfulness and the art together, because we can catch those thoughts. We can notice when we have those judgments, and we can give ourselves enough breathing room and spaciousness and kindness to ourselves to keep wanting to create. Because I think so often I hear people that then it just stops them from creating at all, or they never get back to
Yep.
it. Oh, I made art like 20 years ago and I'd love to, but I just don't do it now. So it just is like, it's just such a big permission slip to create. And then if you want to improve art skills, you can over time with practice. And if that's not the focus and it's more so to create emotionally and make marks, then that also is okay. There's just so much permission.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on something that I wanted to ask about, and also in relation to, I read on your website, you write, mindful art focuses on the creative process versus the final product. And you just touched on that, coming from like a non-judgmental place of like focusing on the process and catching those judgments in real time. And I was curious, could you talk to me about why that shift in focus is so important? Because I think we live in a society that rewards the results and not the effort. And I think that kind of like is so ingrained in us that that's why people have those judgments and they're not focused on the process of things. So talk to me about that shift and why it's important.
Oh my goodness, I could spend a week talking about
yes,
this.
do it.
So I'll share personally, when I was creating art years ago, I, was learning how to draw and paint. So I was doing still lifes and I was learning how to realistically create landscapes and pairs and, to reflect what I was seeing through paint on the canvas. And that was really wonderful. I learned a lot of things about color theory and blending and shape and all the different visual elements. And then I discovered abstract art, which everybody has different preferences. Abstract art is just meaning, that I'm not creating something, a realistic rendition. It might be more on the color and form or how I'm feeling. And I was doing a program in Italy, a 1-year art program. And that's when I really was shifting from more the realistic work to the abstract work. And I remember I spoke with another painter who was doing these really wonderful, like figurative works with abstract, kind of blending the two together. And she was my peer. She was just in the art program. And I remember she said to me one day, because I was feeling a lot of pressure in the art program and wanting to get a good grade and wanting to kind of appease other teachers, or we would do critiques. I wanted others to tell me that what I was making was good enough and that I was like on the right track, And I remember I had a conversation with her and she just said, what if your abstract art that you're making, that is enough? Just the fact that you're making the abstract art, that is the work. And it was, it's one of those moments where somebody says something really small to you and then it can just open up your whole world. Yeah. And that what if question like really planted a seed for me. And so I think there's value in all of it. It's a yes and, it's a both and. There's value in learning the art aesthetics if that's what you're interested in. There's value in learning to be with yourself in the present moment and have permission to create without that judgment. And they're not separate. They can also exist together as well. So I think it just really opened up my how I perceived art and the value of art, and then I was more internal. What did I want to create? What was I feeling called to do? And that is constantly changing as well on my artistic journey, but I think that foundation now is that kindness to myself and that permission, which is why I'm so passionate about sharing this
Yeah,
work.
absolutely. I love what you said about like shifting sort of like the work and the validation internally, because I think we live in such an externally validated addicted world, myself included. That's not me calling anyone else out. Like I think like growing up in the age of like social media and just like I think as Americans in general, we reward like high salaries, traditional like corporate ladder type stuff, or likes on social, or like, you know what I mean. And I think that like external validation is very addicting, and you can see why it feels good to hear that like you did a good job, pat on the back, but I think that sometimes it can be like toxic in a sense because it stops you from maybe performing or doing things for yourself internally. So like how, I guess, like it's such a hard lesson to learn. I guess, do you have any advice on how to shift toward away from external validation into internal, because it's really hard to do.
Yeah, I think especially around creativity and art making as well, it's just so subjective. If you think about music, one person might adore a song and it might repel somebody else, and it's just really such a internal experience. And so I like to think of it like a muscle, which is why I refer to mindful art oftentimes as a practice. Because even after all of these years, I still have internal judgments that come up. I still compare my work to other people. I still sometimes question if what I'm doing is the path that I want to be going down. So it's not that that goes away entirely. Instead, what I found for myself as far as that external to internal validation, or that foundation, is being aware of it. I have to be aware of where am I placing that emphasis, and where can I redirect that emphasis in a way that is going to feel good for me, or that I want to do it in a way that's more intentional. And so I say all the time in our classes, so I used to teach yoga years ago, and in yoga they often say how you practice on the mat, how you do your yoga asana practice, is how you show up in the world. And what we're doing with mindful art, with our drawing, our painting, in our art journals, yes, we're making the art, but also we're practicing something a lot deeper, which is how can I be with what's coming up in a way that's really kind, and how can I shift the focus from that external validation, what others are wanting, pressure, etc., to what's my internal experience, what am I needing right now in the moment, how can I give myself permission to create, how can I be kind to myself. And that translates out in the world. I hear this all the time from students and in my own experience, that it looks like we're doodling, and yes, we are doodling and making art, and that's wonderful, and we're also doing so much more than
Totally.
that. And so it's a practice. I think there's probably lots of ways to practice that shift from external to internal validation. This is just one way that has worked for me.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned your students. I was wondering if you could, do you have like a specific like example or that sticks out to you of someone that, went through your program and did all these mindfulness exercises and then like had like a big life change or like a breakthrough, and how they kind of applied that to their real life?
Yeah, I have so many stories about this. One thing that I hear the most, I would say, so I have an internationally accredited teacher training that trains others how to share mindful art and meditation. And it's not only them sharing in the world, it's their practice first. And what I hear time and time and time again from people is that how life-changing it is for that foundational part of their own practice first. And it's one of those things that I think is hard to put into words, or hard to have tangible results, right? So if you're talking about, I did this program and now I'm making six figures and this is something I can show others. That's very tangible. And that can also happen with teaching. And so I'm not excusing that. But oftentimes what I hear time and again is that it changed their worldview. It changed how they are with themselves. It changed their daily practice. It changed their stress levels. I have one student who's been with me now for 6 or 7 years. It's probably 7 years. She started with me back in 2017. She just came to one of my in-person retreats, and she has done lots of classes, multiple teacher trainings with me. She came to me during a really challenging time right after some deaths in her family. And so she found a lot of peace and support in the practices for herself first, and then also had background and experience with teaching previously. So she was feeling called to sharing with others in her retirement. And then she came to the in-person retreat was then about how to then share, how do you market, how do you get this work out into the world. And so it was really beautiful to be able to connect in person and to hear those are a lot of different levels of how this work can impact you, like your personal self-care practice, your own healing, your ability to feel confident and teach others, sharing out in the world. And so it's hard to explain that, but we had 3 days with each other and just lots of, gush fest of gratitude. And I will also say, I feel like I am, it's not me, like I'm just sharing this work as a guide. I'm holding the space for people. And so much of it just comes back to, the deeper insights come from within, and it really helps having a guide that has been through it before that can guide you through frameworks and processes.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the activities that people do during the in-person retreats?
Yeah, so the in-person retreats are different from the actual doing. We do some of the mindful art practice and some with intuitive collage and journaling, but a big focus is once people have gone through the teacher trainings, they're confident and comfortable with their personal practice and teaching, and the focus really is on how to market in the world without relying on social media. I know you mentioned earlier social media, which so many artists and teachers really use or try to use to get their work out there, and then you post and post and hope and then you get 2 likes or no interaction. And I'm a much bigger fan, although that is wonderful as well, I'm a much bigger fan of what I call touring your signature style or your workshop. And so on the retreat, we really identify what is their particular practice, what is it that they're wanting to teach. We map all of that out, and then who would be good communities for them to partner with to share that workshop. Because I'll say just this last part, but I say to artists and teachers all the time, whether you're doing in-person or online work, if you're wanting to connect with more people, it's much easier to connect with another teacher or school or organization who already has a community of people that might be curious of what you're looking for, which is why art galleries are so great, that you can share your art in an art gallery and they'll host you and introduce you to people. And so it's really, I share my frameworks and my tracking and research systems so they have everything to map all of that out.
That's really cool that you have these two different approaches of like the mindfulness and the art, but also like the business side of like trying to get your work out there. Because as someone who's self-employed, I would love to spend 100% of my time doing my creative fun work, but the business and the practical side, I don't love it, but it's so important. But that can be really, really difficult to figure out, especially if if you haven't like worked in business or your mind just isn't wired that way, like mine isn't. So that's cool that you like kind of approach creativity from all different angles, because that business side is maybe like more tedious to talk about in some ways, but it's so important. So I love that you have like both approaches. That's incredible.
I think it's so important for artists and for teachers, because it is a slightly different skill set. And it's one of those things, again, where like if we haven't done it before, it might feel really awkward or we might not know where to begin. And and it can be simplified, and then so you can create and do your creativity in a way that's more sustainable. So yeah, I'm really passionate about sharing
Yeah, it's
both.
so important. It's not intuitive at all. Like it's so confusing, and so I love that you're teaching people to do that because I need to learn. You mentioned you were a yoga teacher before. I was curious if you incorporate yoga into your mindful creative work.
Yeah, so I taught in person yoga for, I started practicing yoga in 2003, and then I started teaching, I think, around 2014. And for a while, I was teaching month long, 200-hour yoga teacher training in person sessions, and then with three other teachers, because that would be a lot for one person. And then I started incorporating in the intuitive collage and mindful art practices. And then that led to me teaching. I have an online teacher training that combines the mindful art and yoga. And so it's still something that I teach and share. I'm just not doing the in-person. I used to teach at yoga
Oh, cool.
festivals and the month-long trainings. Yeah, very intensive. But it's something that can be partnered really beautifully. Mindful art can be, and meditation can be married really nicely with yoga. And there is I teach a framework and an arc of how to do that in a way that is that makes sense for the body, for people to drop in and be able to create more freely. But it's a really wonderful practice to do with yoga.
Yeah, that's exactly why I wanted to go back to that point is because the mind body connection is so important, but like for example, like when I was working in corporate America, I was in my early 20s, like I felt very like I didn't have that connection sort of like built, or I wasn't in touch with it, I should say. So I was curious, why is the mind body connection important? And for those who are kind of like disconnected in that way, how do you help them get back in touch?
Yes, such a good question. So we actually can't be in a state of stress in our body. Let's say I'm really stressed out and I'm being very judgmental about what I'm creating, and then I want to be creative and curious and open. We can't be in both of those states at the same time. We can oscillate between the two of them, but we can't live in both at the same time. So the more that we can calm our nervous system, be more in our body, be in the present moment, and we can ease out of like a fight, flight, freeze, fawn state, then we can tap into our breath better. We can have that mind body connection. We can then create in and actually be able to tap into parts of our brain with creativity that are just offline. It's not accessible when we're in some of those other states. So it's something that, not to get too like science-based or trauma-informed, those are definitely things I go deeply into in some of my trainings, because it is so closely interconnected. And I think I've heard from a lot of people once I share and they're like, oh, that makes total sense. Like we feel it, we know that's true, but there's actually a lot of science that supports it. So yeah, it's really
Yeah, have you
helpful.
read The Body Keeps the Score? Yeah.
Yeah, I did a program. I read the book and I've studied with Dr. Bessel van der
No
Kolk
way.
when I lived at a yoga center. Yeah, in 2014.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah, that book is life-changing for anyone listening. Like go read it. It's all about mind-body connection, but it's not like textbook, like it's sciencey and there's like all that in there, but it's not textbooky and boring and dense. Like it's very like well written, and yeah, I love that book. I'm a huge fan of it. That's so cool you got to study directly with him. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's such a good book. It can be a little dense, like heavy reading sometimes. So I also love to recommend. I love Waking the Tiger by Dr. Peter Levine, which is like a shorter book, a little lighter, but touches on a lot of the same topics about what's happening with our mind and
Oh,
body.
cool. I'll
Yeah.
have to check that book out. Thank you for the recommendation. I want to talk about creative blocks and inner critics and things that stop people from being creative. Um, what is a creative block really? Like when you boil it down, like I know it looks like one thing on the surface, but what is it kind of tapping into deeper?
Yeah, I often think about creative blocks as stemming from one of two places, just to be like really simplify it down. is that oftentimes it's overwhelm or resistance. And what I see it is that if we're resistant, it might just be that we're comparing our work to others, or we have a mindset block or a limiting belief. We know what to do, but we feel resistant to doing the thing. And then the overwhelm is often that we don't know what to do. We have too many ideas. We don't have the training. We need more support there. So I think that usually a creative block for me is just a pointer around I need something, some other type of support. And it might be that I need training. It might be that I need more experience. I could need an accountability partner. I could need to simplify my schedule. I might need to just adjust my mindset. But it points to, I see creative block just as pointing to a need. And again, I notice oftentimes creative blocks tend to come up when we're on the edge of something that's outside of our comfort zone. Like maybe it's outside of my skill set, or it's outside of my comfort because I don't do that all the time. And it's a way that we can, I believe it's a way typically our inner critic comes in to protect ourselves of, oh, I can't do that thing because I don't have the right supplies, or I don't have the skills, or I don't have the training, or who am I to do it, right? All these things that can come in. It's so fascinating to me. And again, so much of our human experience, we all experience it. And so I have a few different practices that I do, and one inner critic and inner muse, to really identify what is the creative block and what are some really simple, very, very simple, like 2 to 3 things I could do in under 5 minutes to have some movement, because the creative block can be just that. It can be like, having a wall in front of you and you're not able to move.
Oh my gosh, that led perfectly into my next question, is how do people identify it? Because sometimes it's hard to be aware that you even have them, especially if like there are things that you've just told yourself over and over. So how does one even begin to become self-aware of what their blocks are, and how do they move past them?
Yeah, there's this image of an iceberg that maybe people have seen before, but it shows like what our conscious thoughts are, what we are aware of, what's in our awareness, and then beneath the iceberg of subconscious, unconscious thoughts. And so I think there is a lot that even with inquiry, like if we're doing this inner critic, inner muse practice I mentioned, and I'm guiding people through, there's some things that we're already aware of. There's some things that might bubble up to the surface. We can become aware of it. And then I think there's still also some things that we're not aware of yet. That's why it's the, unconscious, where we don't know what some is really deep down that might be blocking us. And so I think for me, it's how I mentioned kind of following the breadcrumbs. It's just making enough space that I can be with it enough, first from a body-based somatic standpoint, like what's happening in my body when I'm feeling totally blocked around this. Oh, my chest is super tight. I'm not taking a breath. I'm holding my breath. I feel tension in my shoulders. And having practices with the mindful art and drawing and breathing that I can settle a bit, because we're talking about that nervous system again. We can't access the creativity if we're stuck in that state. So part of it for me is starting with the body, but then also noticing what are some of the thoughts that might be, and limiting beliefs or blocks that might be feeding into that. But there's a whole process, and how to notice those things, and then as we calm the body and as we make the marks and we make meaning of the marks, then we can get to the idea of brainstorming, or what I like to call heart storming, the solutions, and I think if we jump to just trying to find the solution without doing some of those other things, what I've noticed for myself is I might have a plan, I might have the ideas, but that doesn't mean I feel comfortable taking those steps or doing those things to move out of creative block. And I might not even get to the point of making a plan.
Yeah.
So I think that's why, it's helpful to have something that can, not practice or something else. There's lots of different ways to move through creative blocks, but something to help guide you through.
Yeah, absolutely. And turning our direction toward the inner critic voice that people have, like, where does that voice come from? How does that voice develop?
Yeah, I'm no expert as far as saying exactly where it comes from. I think in my experience, what I've noticed is that it tends to be an external criticism, perhaps from other people, perhaps from society, who knows, that, and that then has become internalized. I've heard people say different things about the inner critic, of like eradicate your inner critic, or quiet your inner critic, or get rid of your inner critic. And I don't see it that way. I see it more as, how can I befriend my inner critic? How can I be kind to my inner critic? How can I, sit just with all of these other pieces of myself, and we can make space for that, still not allow my inner critic to run the show, because then maybe I wouldn't be creating, but not to try to squelch that part, because I feel like that, for me, oftentimes that's when that part has just gotten louder. So yeah, I'm sure it probably is really varied for people of how that voice comes in. But what I have noticed for myself and the people I've worked with is that everybody I've known has had some form of an inner critic at some point. Like, it's just so much of our human experience.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you know when you are giving yourself like sort of valid criticism? Maybe you're like working on something and something needs to be edited or changed, you know what I mean, versus something that is like like, it's like, I feel like sometimes the inner critic can be helpful because it can help you improve your work, it can help you, you know what I mean, because everyone needs to edit, like, very few people's first version of something is like the perfect version. So how do you kind of tell the difference between like sort of that helpful critical voice and a harmful critical one, I guess?
Yeah, for me, I think of it as, is this critical voice, or I think critical is kind of a key part. If it's coming through in a critical tone, then then it's the inner critic. If it's coming through from a place of like curiosity, questioning, wonder, more of a neutral space. Like, if you think about tone, if you imagine, I don't know, that you're talking with somebody, we know what it feels like when we can be in a neutral space and have a curiosity and a question, versus maybe it feels sharper, or maybe a little bit meaner or critical. There's a difference in tone, I notice, for sure, if my inner critic is coming in, or if it's me having a curiosity, which, again, I think with the mindful art piece, the core foundation part is being curious with kindness. And so we can still ask questions as we're making art, or a big part of it is asking questions and being curious, but just doing it in a kind way.
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Because it can kind of sound similar sometimes, at least for me, and it's hard to know sometimes the difference. But I think it just comes with time, and I think like paying attention to like that sort of the tone of like how those thoughts come into your head is so important. I've never heard that before, so thank you. I'm gonna try to internalize that one and take it into my life. So that it's a really wonderful way of putting it. Thank you so much. I was curious if, as you were as you do your work in Mindful Creative Muse, especially like in the early stages, or even to this day, like, do you ever have that inner critic be like, oh, like, what am I doing, or feelings of self-doubt, or is that something you experience in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so when I hear you ask that question, I think about imposter syndrome. Like, because I've been doing this work for a while, and I've been comfortable and I've had some success, what I've noticed is that inner, the imposter syndrome voice comes up for me every time I do like a up level. If you think about like a video game and you like get points and you go to the next level, anytime I have a significant up level in the work that I'm doing, and again, I'm doing something slightly outside of my comfort zone, it's new, maybe that isn't my like home base or comfort zone where I have been for the last year or several years, then it will come up. And I've seen interviews with other, people who have been like huge celebrities. They've been really recognized in their work, and they've been doing it for 30, 40 years. And them talking about, yeah, of course I have imposter syndrome come up, So I think that I don't think that it ever goes fully away. Maybe for some people, I haven't met somebody where it ever goes fully away. I think instead it's how can we notice when that comes up, and then what's our response to it. And that type of imposter syndrome or inner critic can stop us in our tracks. And hopefully if it does that, it's a shorter lived time, and instead, how can I do a lot of the process that I mentioned. The practices that I teach are also practices I do for myself. So I'll do the inner critic, inner muse exercise. I'll do different expressive arts, mindfulness practices. Sometimes I'll just journal, I'll meditate and have awareness around it and then move through the steps so I don't stay stuck
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. I was actually just about to ask you because your work sounds like very emotional. You know, you're tapping into people's vulnerabilities. And of course, you're probably hearing stories of like self limiting beliefs. And the work sounds so inspirational, but could also feel probably very emotional. So I was curious how sort of you keep your cup full when you are dealing with people who are burnt out or struggling or just trying to get back in touch with themselves. Because, yeah, it sounds like it could be like quite emotional.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the practices are so varied. It really can meet people where they are. So if they're wanting just calming practices to have some warm-ups to then get back to their other creative practices, then that's great and there's options for that. And then if you're wanting also to make deeper meaning or have deeper insights, there's also options for that. I like all of it and it just depends on how I'm feeling for the day, and I love supporting students with all of it as well. I think what you're asking though is super important around self-care and that whole, cliche of having your own oxygen mask on first, which I share that with my students a lot. Self-care is a huge part of my life in and out of teaching. So I just really have a deep reverence for self-care. I make a lot of space and time for it. I love to do vocal improv singing. I love being in nature. I do partner dancing. I love just connecting with friends and family, or I have a cozy blanket on my couch with warm tea. I have all of these things that are go-tos for me for my own self-care, and also sometimes just not doing anything, like just having space. I don't have to do anything, I can just be and have that space, but intentionally carving out space because the world can be busy and the world can be busy for me too. And so that's
I
important.
love
Yeah.
that. If somebody is listening to this episode and they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I want to get back in touch with my mindfulness and my creativity. What's a simple exercise that they can do today?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually have a video on my YouTube channel at Mindful Creative Muse that you can watch the video and be guided through it. It's a 10 or 15 minutes long and it's a really simple body scan drawing meditation. So it's for anyone who hasn't heard of the term body scan, it's really just scanning your awareness through your body from top to bottom or bottom to up and noticing sensations. And then also, it's not just a form of meditation, you're combining it with mark making. And that could be more realistic and literal. It might be abstract. It's really whatever you're comfortable with. But I do guide through that practice. So that's one of my go-to favorites. Yeah, that I think is really beginner
Oh, I
friendly.
love that. Okay, I'll link that in the show notes so that people that way people can watch the video when they're watching this or listening to this episode. That's awesome. Um, what are some of the ways that you want Mindful Creative Muse to change or evolve in the future?
That's a good question. So I am really passionate. We spoke a little bit earlier about the kind of multiple hats. It's the being an artist, but also being a teacher and also the marketing or business side of things. And when I went through a handful of different trainings years ago in my master's program, I was mostly taught experientially. I was taught how to do the thing, but not then how to teach or share or have it be sustainable. So I'm really passionate about training teachers and training not just the doing the practice for themselves, but how do you facilitate in a trauma informed way? How do you facilitate confidently? How do you, as one of my students always says, get butts in the seats? Like, how do you have people find
Yeah.
you and want to take classes with you? But even for artists, it's still good to have the business tools as well. So that's really important to me, kind of that whole holistic approach. And then also, I'm not quite sure because everything always evolves and changes. So I'm curious how things continue to evolve and change in my business as well. 5, 10 years from now, it could look entirely different.
Yeah,
Who knows?
absolutely. What is your definition of success?
My definition of success is that it depends on the person. And for me, it's largely so I love Viktor Frankl. For anybody who knows Viktor Frankl, he wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. He was an Auschwitz survivor, and he talks about how you can choose to make meaning in your life. And so for me, success is largely, do I feel a deeper sense of purpose and connection to what I'm doing? And that in and of itself is success. Yes, there's lots of other ways success can look like, but if I'm doing something that has deeper meaning and purpose for me, then yeah, that's successful.
Yeah,
for me.
I absolutely love that. And your work has so much meaning and purpose. And I know you've probably changed lives, hundreds or thousands. I don't know how many students you've had, but like I can tell through the work that you do, because like you said, like creativity is a human sort of instinct, you know, and if you're out of touch with that, the rest of other areas of your life suffer. So that's wonderful that the work you're doing is helping people get back in touch with their true selves. And yeah, I think the work that you do is absolutely beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. All right, Cynthia, this has been great. Are you ready to move into the lightning round?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, what is something new that you've tried lately?
I tried a new vocal improv playtime with a musician. So instead of just doing it vocally, he was playing piano and guitar, and I was doing vocal improv.
Oh,
So that was new
cool.
for me.
That's so fun. When I was in chorus in like middle school and high school, like we used to do it. Is it scatting, right? Is that what it's called? Yeah, we used to
Yeah.
do that in chorus, and it was always very fun. So I love that. And it's just a way to kind of like get nonsense, you know, because it doesn't have to be like real words. It could be sounds, you know what I mean? And so it's a way to just kind of like let loose and just let your intuition like, yeah, I love it. That's awesome. All right, do you have a message or a lesson that you want to share with listeners?
I think we've touched on it, is just that we're all creative, and finding ways that you can support yourself to allow yourself to express that creativity.
Wonderful. And what is one thing you wish you knew when you were first starting out?
Um, That's such a good question. I think having some type of support, a guide or accountability buddy, just not doing things totally by yourself. I say to my students now that we're not creatives on an island, that being a creative can sometimes feel very like alone. And so, yeah, just knowing that you can have support in a myriad of different ways.
I love that. Yeah, finding community is so important. Absolutely. All right, Cynthia, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing the important work that you do. Where can people find you? Check out your work, sign up for one of your courses or one of your retreats, or all of the things. Tell us.
Yeah, if people are curious to learn more about mindful art and meditation, I have 2 free things on my website, which I'll give you links for. One is a mindful art for self-care workbook that has prompts you can do at home. And then if you're more visual and you want to actually be guided through practices, I have a free 60-minute art as meditation workshop. And I go over the 3-part framework. I guide you through 3 practices, and then you can continue to do those at home as well. So that those are 2 things I'll share that will be in link notes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Thank you so much for having me. I love chatting all about creativity
Me
with you.
too.